Young man by the name of Joe had a girlfriend, and that relationship ended, and then the girlfriend got her a new boyfriend, and the family, Joe's family, began noticing some vandalism around their home. There was some vandalism to the house. There was vandalism to the car, to their cars there at their house, and they saw this car. It was a black Dodge Challenger that kept coming by and was seen close to their home. Joe finds out that that is his ex-girlfriend's boyfriend who's been coming around the house and vandalizing things. And so the family started to get a plan. Now, this is not a recommendation, I promise you. It's never a good thing and never a good idea. And as you'll see, this story turns out very tragically. They got a plan, and they're going to take care of this problem. And they see the Dodge Challenger come by their house, and they're ready, and they're waiting. And that there is a gun involved, there is a physical altercation, and the driver of this Challenger is shot. He gets out of the car, he starts running, and he is alive. They call MedFlight, and they take him to the hospital, and there he dies. That's a sad story. The saddest part of it is that it wasn't even the right guy. It wasn't Joe's ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. This was someone who lived in the neighborhood. They had gotten confused. They were so sure that they had identified the car and the person, and taking all this, the law, into their own hands, they had tragically taken the life of an innocent man. It's so important for us to have an accurate picture of Jesus Christ, of who He is, because, as you're going to see today, an accurate picture of Jesus Christ will help us to know how we view our world and how we view the circumstances of our lives. Take your copy of God's Word and open it to the book of Matthew, chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. We saw last week that Matthew gives us this picture of Jesus in a way that it identifies who He is. Who else can take 5 loaves and 2 fishes, multiply them, and feed nearly 20,000 people? Well, none other than God Himself can do that. And so Jesus is operating with the power of God. He is doing things that only God can do. There's obviously not just the identification of who Jesus really is, which makes a difference, but there's also that element of discipleship in last week's message, in that He said, you feed them, and they said, we can't, and He says, bring the loaves to me, and then He distributes them to the disciples, and the disciples distribute. They take what they can't do it, but they take what Jesus can do, and then they convey it to many people. They are doing a great work. A great work is done through the disciples because of Jesus. Let me stop here because you're going to hear this all morning. It is because of who Jesus is that you can have confidence in following this person. You don't need to just follow someone just because it's a popular thing. You don't need to follow Jesus just because I tell you to. You need to follow Jesus because of who Jesus is. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what my opinion is or what your opinion is. What matters is the reality of Jesus. And so because of who He is, you can have confidence and trust Him to view your circumstances in your life, to view the world in a totally different way because of who Jesus is. follow along with me as we read just a couple of verses of today's text, beginning at verse 26. Matthew chapter 14, verse 26. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit." And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." You've heard this text before. You've heard many lessons. I'm sure that some of you have taught lessons in Vacation Bible School on this text. You have taught Sunday school. You've heard it all of your life about Jesus walking on the waters and how He comes to the disciples who are in a boat and they're laboring feverishly and they're not getting anywhere, and they are not even sure that could this really be Jesus coming to us on the water. Notice here the setting. Let's back up a little bit. Back up to verse 22 is where this pericope begins. Notice in verse 22, it says, "And straightway Jesus constrained His disciples to get into a ship and to go before Him unto the other side, while He sent the multitudes away." Two things are happening in this verse. The first is that it tells us that Jesus sends the disciples away, and He also dismisses the multitudes. If we go back into last week's lesson or last week's message in the previous verses, Jesus had initially wanted to go and be alone with His disciples. This comes on the heels of hearing about John the Baptist. But then the multitudes just show up. And then the disciples, you know what they said? Send them away, send them away. And Jesus says, "I'm not going to send them away. I'm going to do a great miracle, and I'm about to reveal to you who I really am." And so now, after He does that, He sends them away. It's almost like He goes back to His original plans. Now I want to be alone. And so He not only is going to be alone, not just with His disciples, He wants to be alone by Himself. And He goes up to a mountain to pray. He sends His disciples away. He sends the multitudes away. And He tells His disciples to go get into a ship. Notice here in the end of verse 20, or on into 23, "And when He had sent the multitudes away, He went up to a mountain to pray. And when the evening was come, He was there alone." And you see the picture here of Jesus being in a mountain and by Himself. He is praying. We're not revealed exactly what His focus is in this prayer. You're going to find out, probably has something to do later on with His future being betrayed and crucified. But that's not revealed here. That's not the major point. But notice what it says. He is alone. And then in verse 24, look at what's happening. While He is praying, while He is on the mountain, look at verse 24. "But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary." So look at the picture here. This reminds us of the first ship, the first time the disciples were in a ship. Jesus was with them on that time. You remember that? Back in Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. And remember, Jesus is sleeping. He's in the ship. We see almost the same picture here, except Jesus is not with them. That would probably give us a little more fear, wouldn't it? Doesn't that kind of add to the fear factor? If we had a little dial, we'd say, "Yeah, that's on a 9 now." We're dialing it up a little bit. Not only are we in the same situation, we're in a boat, we're out here on a sea, the wind is working against us, the storm is battering us, and there's two things I want you to notice there in that verse, in that Matthew does, I think rather purposely, is he uses two words and he personifies this storm. He personifies it in a way that makes it real to us and it's real to the people. Have you ever felt like that you were in life and you were swimming upstream? You have, haven't you? Have you ever felt like that life was working against you? Have you ever felt like that literally you weren't just in a bad circumstance, but that you were actually being attacked? That is the language that that Matthew uses here. he is using this language, battered, and then contrary. The first one, battered, it means that he is saying there that the storm is actually delivering blows against him. It's like it's hitting him. It's hitting them. It is beating against the ship. The ship is being struck like a person is punching them. And then the second thing is, you say, well, that's just a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence, because the second verb that he uses here, contrary against it, it means literally like a person is working against you. It is against you. It is like an opponent. So the wind is like an opponent. The storm is like a person punching the ship. That is where the disciples are in this boat. First thing I want to tell you is this. This is the first thing I want you to take with you, is that as a disciple, sometimes you will be sent to places and into situations that are uncomfortable. This is his first lesson on discipleship. This is what he is revealing and teaching his disciples. How did the disciples get there? Oh, they got there by chance. They were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not what it says, does it? It says that Matthew tells us that Jesus sent them and told them to go into the ship. By the way, that word there, constrained, in the King James in verse 22, it literally means compelled. It is almost like a forceful pushing them into the ship. He commands them to get into the ship. Do you think for 1 minute that Jesus did not realize what he was doing? He had a purpose, and so there is a purpose in this, and there is to teach a lesson, is that sometimes you will be in uncomfortable situations. You say, well, I don't understand that. That's difficult for me to accept. It probably is difficult for everyone to accept, but it's something that you will have to learn as a disciple. You know, we sometimes diagnose our surroundings as to whether or not we're in the will of God by whether things are going good. That is a really, really bad rubric to apply to your life. Just because things are going well does not indicate that you are necessarily in or not in the will of God. You can be out of the will of God and things go right. You can be in the will of God and things are your circumstances are going bad. That's not the indicator, and Jesus is showing you that right here, is they're in a bad situation. They're in a life-threatening situation, but they are also at the same time in the will of God. Do I have more to tell you right now about that? I do not. But it's something that everyone has to learn. Notice what happens in this story, because it gets even better. It gets deeper than this. Notice in the next verse, in the fourth watch of the night, this might be my favorite verse. This is a powerful verse in this text. Look at verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night. What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about Roman terminology here. He's talking about literally from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. It's the fourth watch. It's the fourth quarter of the night. I know I may not have a lot of football players, a lot of basketball players in the room this morning, but let me tell you something. When the fourth quarter comes, it's time to dig a little bit deeper. They are in the fourth quarter. They are almost at the end of the game. At the same time, they're almost at the end of their rope. Do you realize what's happening? They got in the boat at the beginning of the night, and at the end of the night, they're still in the boat, and things are not getting better. But here is the good news. This is my favorite part. Jesus came to them. He came to them. That's what you need. I want you to know the second thing that you need to take with you this morning is He comes to you too. I got two different kinds of audience members. I've got saved people and I got lost people. I got saved people and I got lost people. I'm going to give you an application for both of you. As a lost person, Jesus will come to you too. And He'll come in the fourth watch of the night. He'll come in the darkest hour. and He'll come and He'll reveal Himself to you, and He will show you you can believe in Him and you can be saved today. In the darkest hour of your spiritual depravity, when you have no hope, Jesus comes to you. The other audience member here who's saved, Jesus comes to you too. Jesus comes to you as a believer in the darkest hour of your life, in the darkest part of the night. I do not think that this miracle takes place at night for no reason. I think it adds. Do you know how scary it is to be on the water and you're rowing and the wind is blowing against you? You've been out in the daytime on a lake like that and felt like you were trapped, like you couldn't get anywhere. But imagine being out there at night. You cannot see, you cannot navigate. You don't have any idea, have I gone in a circle? What way am I going? I'm out here at night. It just adds to the fear. But dear friend, in the darkest hour of your life, when the fear is at the highest, as a believer, you can count on God to be there with you in the darkest hour. He comes to you too. Notice here in verse 26. The disciples' terror is explained. When the disciples saw Him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit." And they cried out for fear. So you see that they are troubled. They're not believing what they're seeing. In fact, they probably are imagining that, you know what, we're seeing a ghost right now because we're about to be a ghost. The sea, in that deep water, it's played on their minds. I want you to understand that there's going to be a time in your life where you're not going to know heads from tails because you're going through such a dark hour and the circumstances are so terrible. The level of confusion in your life is going to be at an all-time high. You know, confusion is a great weapon that Satan uses. Confusion, distraction, fear, exaggerating things, embellishing things, making things worse than they really are. It is a weapon of Satan himself. And they have fallen victim of it. I said last week, because they're human. I'll say it again, because they're human. And that's exactly why. It doesn't mean that it's a futile endeavor to be able to say, well, I'm always going to be in this situation, and I'm never going to. No. With Jesus, watch what happens. It's different. It's different. Notice what he says. But straightway Jesus spake unto them. He wasted no time. He responded immediately. That's what it says. But straightway, immediately Jesus said, He's not going to leave them hanging in a lurch. He's not going to leave them hanging in suspense. He says, "It is I, be of good cheer." It is I. You don't have to worry about. And he says, "Be not afraid." You don't have to listen to me about fear. Listen to what Jesus says. But here's the third thing that I want you to take with you, is that you can be courageous and trust Him because of who He is. It is not just that you're going to be in a bad situation, and as a disciple, that I can trust Him. It is not just that He's going to come to you, but what the most important thing, where everything turns on a pivot, is that you can trust Him not only because of what you've heard in your Bible lessons and your preaching, but because of who Jesus is. The one who has sent you. If I had sent you, you're probably going to be fearful. But because that you know Jesus and who Jesus is, you don't have to be afraid. Jesus said you don't have to be afraid. And let me tell you what he is saying here. That in the Greek, it's ego eimi, which means I am that I am. Have you ever heard that before? Some of you are shaking your heads. Yeah, I've heard that. who else said that? God said that. God said that in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 14 when Moses was before the burning bush, and he said, when God responded and said, Moses, I am that I am. It is all throughout the Old Testament, and it is the identity of God. I want to share with you a few more scriptures in Isaiah 41:4, and if some of you are taking notes, you might want to just jot these down. Don't bother to turn there. I'm going to read them very quickly, but Isaiah 41:4, he says, I, the Lord, the first and with the last, I am He. That's what God said about Himself. All of these have the I am, ego, eimi phrase in there. Look at Isaiah 41:13. For I, the Lord thy God, will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, fear not, I will help thee. What is Jesus saying here as He comes to them walking on the waters? Don't forget, He's walking on the waters. That is another big thing here, isn't it? But He is revealing, I am that I am. But He's also saying to not be afraid. It is what God said. God said, I am that I am, do not fear. Also in Isaiah 51:12, I, even I, am He that comforteth you. Who art thou that thou shouldest be afraid of a man that shall die? What is Jesus saying here when He comes to them on the Sea of Galilee, walking on the waters? He is saying, I am that I am. Do not be afraid. It is because of who He is that you don't need to be afraid. It is not just because He has appeared. It is not just because He can rescue them. It is not just because that it's another warm body that we can have to help us row this boat. It is because of who He is at the core of His identity. Well, it gets a lot better than this. We've totally glossed over and skipped over the fact that He's walking on the waters. Walking on the waters. Isn't that something? Well, it's something that was said of God in the Old Testament. Notice in Psalm 77:19, the God of the Old Testament was walking on the waters. Psalm 77:19, listen to this. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. That was said of God. He was walking on the water. Yahweh of the Old Testament was one who walked on the water. Notice this in Isaiah 43:16. Thus saith the Lord, and that is Yahweh, that is God, which maketh a way in the sea and a path in the mighty waters. The God of the Old Testament walks on the waters. Look at Job 9:8. Job talks about God, and he is explaining who God is, and he says that, which alone spreadeth out the heavens and treadeth upon the waves of the sea. God walks from wave to wave. And what does Jesus do? He's not just there to rescue them. He will rescue them, but He's there to reveal who He is. He is the God of the Old Testament. Everything that Jesus does was said about God. He feeds the 5,000. He appears to them. He has omniscience. He knows what they're going through. Do you realize how many miracles are in this text? Let's back up just a minute. He sent them alone in the boat. He sent the multitudes away. He's alone on the mountain praying. They're down there in the ship being blown around. Jesus knows. Jesus knows. The second thing is this. Not only does Jesus know, that is a supernatural power that Jesus has. He knows what you're going through. The second thing, He comes to you, and He comes walking on the sea. Oh, He could have got His own boat, right? And rowed it out there. He didn't need one. He walked across the waves. That's the second miracle. And stay tuned. Watch this. In verse 28 through 31, you're going to see another one. And Peter answered Him and said, Lord, if it be You. This is the the response, the conditional response of what Jesus just said. He says, "It is I." Peter says, "If it is you." You see that? "It is I am." He says, "If it is I am." Watch this. "Lord, if it be you, bid me come unto thee on the water." I'm going to tell you, it's a great statement of faith. I don't know what you've been told in the past. Maybe you've been told great things and it's nothing. But if there's an ounce of negativity applied towards Peter here, you've missed the point. Peter is saying to Jesus, "Lord, if it is you, then I know that you can call me to you and I will be able to do it." It's a great statement of faith. It's not anything negative towards Peter. Peter wants to believe and wants to understand who Jesus is. And he says, "Lord, if it's you, I know you can say the word and I'll be walking across the water too." What is Jesus' response? I want you to understand this. This is very important. Jesus says, "Come." He doesn't say, no, you got to do this and you got to do that and you got to do this and you got a whole laundry list of things. No, Jesus says one word. He says, "Come." I want you to understand something very, very plainly and very clearly. There is an open invitation to Jesus all the time. Jesus is willing to take you. In the darkest hour of the night, they are at the end of their rope. And Peter says, "Lord, that's you. Just say the word." And he does. He says, "Come." That's all he has to say. Watch what happens. "And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on water." Again, I know that this story sometimes I don't know why. Maybe it's just me. I've heard some different perspectives of this, and it goes south and negative in a hurry. Watch very carefully. Number one, that Jesus does another miracle. Peter is walking on the water. Peter's great faith is what puts him in that situation. Jesus is revealing who He is. Not only can Jesus walk on water, He can empower you to walk on water. Do you understand how huge that is? Watch what happens, because there's going to be another lesson that's going to come and it's going to hit us really quick. Notice here, to go to Jesus, but verse 30, "But when He saw the wind boisterous, He was afraid. And beginning to sink, He cried, saying, Lord, save me." Can I move on here? I need to move on. Look at verse 31, another miracle. Jesus stretched forth His hand and caught him and pulled him up out of the water. Don't you love that part? I love that part. I love the fact, there's a lapse in Peter's faith, but what I love about Jesus is that He doesn't hold it against him, and He doesn't condemn him for his lack of faith. You see that? He has a little lapse, doesn't he? He has a little hiccup in his life. I'm going to tell you that you may come across people that are going to condemn you, but Jesus, there's now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. You remember that from a few minutes ago? When you are in union with Christ, you don't have to worry about the legal judgment that comes from God, and it's the only judgment that matters. You may take it from people. They may look down on you, look down on their nose at you, but you ain't got to worry about Jesus. Jesus is always, He says, "Come," and then He reaches down and He pulls him up out of the water. Let me tell you why this is important. He said, notice what Jesus says. He says, "O you of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt?" That word doubt is the key word in that question. You say, "Well, He's only human." He is only human. But listen very carefully. Don't get sidetracked. Stay on point. Jesus is saying your lack of faith is because you doubted. What does that mean? Let me tell you, there's a word in doubt. The word doubt is inside another word. It's called double. You see that? Double. Great way to understand this and remember it. The word double. Doubt is when you are double-minded. You're going two different ways. You have divided loyalties. You are thinking that Jesus can do this, but then you look around and you see the circumstances. You see the fear. The fear becomes to overwhelm you. Divided loyalties. I see you, Lord, but I also see this. You see that? I'm divided. What Jesus is telling you is this. You can't be divided. You can't live a double life. Not and be successful in your walk with me. When you're walking with me, I can empower you to do anything, but the minute you start to have divided loyalties and doubt in your mind, you will stumble. That is the point that he's making. This is the next thing I want to share with you. Jesus is appealing to a full and focused and sustained faith in His power to overcome the impossible. You say, well, let me tell you three things. First of all, it's not half-hearted. It's not half-hearted. He's not asking you, well, disciples, what I want you to have is a half-hearted faith. That's not, I don't get that from this. And I don't get that from any part in the Bible. He's talking about a full commitment to Him. A full commitment. And He's not talking about an inconsistent faith. Well, guys, it's okay as long as you follow me about 35% of the time. That's not what Jesus is saying. He is saying, you follow me all the way, all the time. You know, I thought about this example, a little illustration, a little simple little thing in my mind as I was studying this. I thought about a light bulb. You ever seen a light bulb? It seems like there's a little short in it, and it'll get dim, won't it? It'll get dim. Sometimes it'll flicker a little bit. If your faith is a flickering faith that looks like it's shorted out, that's not what Jesus is asking from you. Amen. He is asking for a full and a focused on Him kind of faith, and it's sustained, it is strong, it follows through. Well, we're going to have to move on. Notice here the waves cease. Here's another miracle. When they were coming to the ship, the wind ceased. That's another miracle. Psalm 89:9. Thou rulest the raging of the sea. When the waves thereof, thou stillest them. This is another example of God of the Old Testament who has power over the seas. Psalm 93:4. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. Look in verse 33, what the disciples and how they react. When they see all of this. They've seen a lot tonight, haven't they? I mean, they got themselves in a pickle, got themselves in a mess. Here comes Jesus. He's walking across the waters like what was said about God. He tells Peter to walk on water. He does walk on water. He pulls Peter up out of the water, and then he tells the wind and the sea to stop. They've seen a lot tonight. Notice what they do. They worship Him. Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. No truer words could be spoken. He's the Son of God, all right, in a very rich and deep way. He does everything that God can do. Notice in verse 34 through 36, you see it's like a summary of the chapter. When they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. It means that they had successfully gone to the other side. They come to this little village here. When the men of that village knew who He was, they sent out into all the country round about, and they brought unto Him all that were diseased, and they besought Him that they might only touch the hem of His garment. As many as touched were made perfectly whole. Not only does Jesus heal them, He can speak the word and He can heal someone. He can lay His hand on someone, or they can just touch the hem of His garment and they can be healed. You see the great power of Jesus put on great display throughout all these verses. I'm going to leave you with this. Is the power and the authority over nature and disease. Look at these. He can control the oceans. He can control the sicknesses and the disease. He can overcome all of your conditions, the crippled people, the deaf people, the blind people, the mute people, all sorts of different diseases and sicknesses, and even corona, all of them. Jesus has power over all these things. You're all in a different situation in your life. All of your problems may not be disease. All of your problems may not be nature. You may not have these issues, but I'm going to tell you what, you are going to be in the fourth watch of the night sometime during your life. Amen. It may be in a spiritual way. You may be lost. You may come to the point where you realize that Jesus really is the Son of God, just like He said. And that's when you need to trust Him. He's asking you. This is not just a feel-good story. This is not just it's not just a hero story. This is a story about a real Savior who is revealing Himself. His true identity is revealed right before them. And He's asking you, trust me. Will you trust Him today? As our musicians come, let's prepare for a song of invitation. There's a lot of people who are not trusting Him. They're not trusting Him in their everyday life. They're not trusting Him. You can stand. Let's all stand. They're not trusting Him in their everyday life. Some have not trusted Him as their Savior for your life. Trust Him today as we sing.